Hey van campers, how do you keep yourself warm and heat your van and your water while you're camping outside in cold weather? As you can see today, I brought it all out for you. I've been growing out my scruff because it's been cold and it's wintertime and I'm trying to keep myself warm. So today we're going to talk about van heating systems, how to heat hot water, how to heat the air, all at the same time in a do-it-yourself system. So let's get to it. All right, so you want to go skiing, right? You want to camp out at the ski resort, or you want to boondock and camp outside nearby. Something I've done quite a bit of. And how do you keep your van warm? So number one thing is really good insulation. I've talked about this before. Great insulation in the walls, the ceiling, and the floor, and also the cab area. I've also talked about why I like curtains, because they overlap. They don't just insulate the windows, but they overlap the window frame, the door frame, right, as well, or the window frame. Then they keep that warm, because most of these van windows, let's face it, they have a very poorly insulated window frame. So even if you're insulating the window with a little window shade, you still got this cold air being transferred, or heat being transferred through that window frame. So curtains cover all that up and help you insulate all of it. They can also separate the cab, or at least insulate also your windshield and other areas like that really well. Bottom line is, we're going to get into hot water and heating systems today. We're talking about what I did in my van, Mountain Bluebird. And so I've talked about it before, how I've loved to go out and camp out in the cold, the snow. I'm looking outside right now and there's feet of snow outside, and I've been camping out in the outside. I'm actually going back out tomorrow morning, and I'm looking forward to going back out there and being out there, even though it is going to be cold. The weather forecast is saying it's going to be down to about 0 degrees where I'm going to be camping. Now, how am I going to stay warm? One, that insulation, but two is good heat. And so the way that I installed my heating system, I'm going to go into that. And it heats not just, of course, my air, but also the water. And so I have both hot water and hot air all off the same system. It heats up very well. Typically, even in these cold environments, I do not run my heater at all, but a little bit in the morning and a little bit in the evening. I leave it off during the day, I leave it off at night, because I am warm enough. Now, part of that's the benefit of having a bed that's always set up, nice big comforter on it and stuff like that, so I'm nice and toasty at night. But heating it up at night gets me just warm enough to heat up that bed, get it nice and toasty and cozy, and me nice and toasty and cozy. I get in there, and by the time I wake up in the morning, I'm gonna go in a little bit of this and talk about like temperatures. But basically, I wake up in the morning, and even when it's about 20 degrees or even down to 10 degrees outside, inside the van, it's about 50 degrees. And so it sounds cold, it is. And so I designed my system so that with one switch, I can reach from bed, hit that one switch, and the heating system turns on. I can get back in bed, and 15 to 20 minutes later, the van is heating up. Within a half an hour or so, I've gone from 50 degrees to maybe about 60 degrees. And within about 45 minutes, I've gone from that 50 degrees to about 70 degrees inside the van. Now, within about 5 to 10 minutes, I actually have at least reasonably warm water, and within 15 to 20 minutes I have hot water. So I could take a shower even in those cold environments in a pretty short period of time. The benefit this provides is that within 15 to 20 minutes, you can actually get out of bed. You can make your morning coffee, your morning tea. You're at least getting, at least semi-warm inside the van. You can just throw on some just like casual clothes, and you can be comfortable inside your van walking around. Or you can choose to stay in bed. Stay in bed until it's nice and cozy inside, whatever temperature it is, at 20 or 30 minutes. And by then, you got some nice warm environment all throughout your van. Now, I did this with a hydronic heating system. My last van, I did with an air heating system. So an air heating system is very much like the D2, as it's commonly referred to, the Diesel 2 air heater. By either Espar or Webasto, or a couple of different manufacturers that make that. And it connects right into our diesel fuel tanks on our Sprinter vans. Those have an auxiliary fuel output. Those are about the size of a shoebox. They're incredibly compact. They put out a tremendous amount of heat, and they heat up very quickly, and that's a great way to get really quick heat in your van. But they do not heat hot water, and that's the downside of them. They're also pretty noisy, and so that's the other downside of it. And so when I had my D2 in my previous van, I didn't have any hot water, didn't have any water system, so all I could do is heat the air. Still an advantage, but the downside is also I found it to be pretty noisy, and I did not like using it because of the noise it created. So I wanted a quieter, more gentle heating system in my new van, and also when they heated hot water. And one of the ways to do that, of course, is with what is called the D5. And the D5, by the same manufacturers, also using diesel. There's also the B5, which uses gasoline or petrol. Now that heats hot water. So if you're heating hot water, how do you get that to hot air? So I'm going to talk through it here. Now, there are a lot of different people who do make hydronic heating systems, and people, of course, will install air heating systems. And if you're not comfortable with doing it, by all means, have someone of them do it. Now, there's lots of information that is available both here on YouTube and other places to learn how to do that. It isn't too hard to install an air heater. It's pretty simple. You basically drill a hole in your van, you connect an auxiliary fuel heater, and you hook some power up to it. That maybe those things sound scary to you. If they are, they're not that difficult, but by all means, just have somebody else do it for you. There's plenty of installers out there that are qualified and experienced to do that. When it comes to the D5, it is more complex. You are also, of course, running water systems to it, both a supply and a return, or a cold and a hot, going to it. And there's a little more complicated to it than that. And there are companies out there that make really good hydronic heating systems. Rixen's is a great example. You can go to Rixens.com and you can certainly buy their package, and you could either have it installed or install it yourself. And by all means, do that as well if that's more comfortable for you. I chose to take the do-it-yourself approach. And so the do-it-yourself approach is I basically figured all the components that I needed in the system to make it work, and I found that it works tremendously well. It really, actually, a little bit better than I had even anticipated. And so I'll go into a little more in those details about how well it works, but let's go into how it actually works and what I installed. We have the factory D5 right here, which is designated by this right here, which my Sprinter van I ordered with the factory D5. Now, unfortunately, that will only run when it is below 37 degrees. So when the temperature sensor on the van actually detects it's 37 or below, and then I can run it. And I have to have the engine running to run this one as well. There's 4 different heating option systems with auxiliary heaters that Mercedes offers, which is fantastic. But I chose the one where it does have to have the engine running and it has to be below 37 degrees. Now, this is really an auxiliary heating system. It heats the engine up much quicker when it's really cold out, which is great because the engine really does not heat up. This diesel engine does not heat up well when it's really cold and there isn't much load on it. So like coasting down a hill, for example, or just kind of cruising on the highway on a flat highway without a reload. If you're climbing a hill, great, or even around town, it'll eventually heat up, but it does take some time. But that helps heat it up much, much, much quicker. And I can idle the engine for 5 minutes or so, or even just a few minutes, and within those few minutes I'll get the engine cooling up to at least a moderate temperature to start getting a little bit of heat out. Now, the Sprinters also have an electric heating within the dash, and those auxiliary heaters will turn on when it senses it's cold and it doesn't have warm coolant yet going to it, and it'll actually put out electrically heated air out of the dash. Now, it's not hot yet. It won't really get hot until we get up to a higher coolant temp, when that also augments the electric heating. And then once it gets about 175 degrees Fahrenheit, the coolant temperature, it'll then shut off the auxiliary heaters, the electric auxiliary heaters. You'll see actually your voltage pop up just a little bit, maybe a tenth of a volt or so when those shut off, because they're pretty substantial load. I think they're about 40 amps or so. And then you also will feel nice, warmer, hotter air by that point too. But this helps it get there far quicker. And I found that when it's pretty cool out and I don't have much load in the engine, it can take 15, 20, even 30 minutes for the engine to even get to a reasonable temperature, say reasonable between about 150 degrees to about 175 degrees. With the auxiliary heater, it can get there in about 5 to 10 minutes. So it definitely speeds it up quite a bit. It also gets you heat out of your dash much quicker. Now, this system connects into the engine. And it is a switch on the dash, right, all through the factory system, and that's the temperature sensor that controls it. I tied into this system, I put in 2 isolation valves. That's what these are indicating here. So one in the supply, one on the return. And the supply then goes into basically an Espar factory product. They call it a 5 or a 6-way valve. It's a thermostatic valve, and it has a little thermostat sensor in between the two linkages that will open up if it's above, I believe it's 175 degrees also. And so in that case, if I've got hot water that's either coming from the engine that's 175 degrees or hotter, it will allow that to go on to my cooling system. If it's not above that 175 degrees, then it will not go into my cooling system. And really I should have a pen here, but really there's a linkage here between these two that isn't shown, and I should have shown that here. But it's a little, these two link in really to that same spot here. So I should have drew that a little bit differently, but so my mistake there. So basically the hot water from the engine and the factory D5 will go on to my hot water tank. This is an IsoTemp Slim 5-gallon model. It fits incredibly well between the factory sill and the internal frame, right basically between the fuel tank and the outside of the body. Fits incredibly well in there, and they have 4, 5, and 6-gallon versions of this. It has a coolant heat exchanger in there. So the coolant, the hot water coolant, will go through that exchanger, and in there is a hot water tank, and it'll heat the hot water, right? And it also, of course, that transfers that heat from the coolant to the hot water, and then it can pass on that coolant onward. Before we get to that, let's talk about the second D5 that I installed, and that's this one right here. And so this second D5 I can control by my single switch, that single switch being up here. When I turn that single switch on, it also powers my 2 fan coils, one in the front, one in the rear. One in the rear is larger. It's right underneath my bed, so it heats up the garage and the bed area very nicely. There's one in the front, heats up underneath my front seats. And I say the front seats, my front camping seats, not the other seats, passenger driver seats. And it heats that up. It also powers my variable speed fan controls for those fans. It controls my pump. This circulates that water, and also the thermostat for the D5. And let's get into all that in just another minute. This hot water then from the D5 or either D5 will go on to my isotherm hot water heater, and that heats hot water that goes on to all my plumbing fixtures. This is my pressure pump for my domestic water system, which pulls from my tank, and so designates, and that goes out to all my fixtures from here. This hot water comes in, heats that coolant, and then it goes on this 3-way valve, which is also switched by my switch up here. And so that when I turn on my one heater switch, it activates my fan coils, my circulation pump, my secondary circulation pump, and opens up this switch. The reason why I have this valve in here is this way I don't have hot water flowing through my fan coils all the time whenever that coolant is above 175 degrees, heating up the interior of the van unnecessary when it's not needed. Otherwise, that coolant, when that switch is off and closed, and I don't have heating called for, it just simply returns back into the engine system. A couple things to note here. This is a check valve, so that coolant cannot go backwards up through the coolant system. It has to go backwards to this way. There's also another check valve here, even though this is my return, because the coolant is generally circulating pretty freely through the engine. This way, there isn't really so much a directed supply and return on the engine. This way, it can't come backwards as well. Also, another point I really want to make, and that's my third point, is that all of this is at the same level. This whole coolant system is at the same level. The benefit that provides me is pretty big. I don't have to have my own expansion tank for my heating system. The coolant reservoir expansion tank for the engine happens to be higher than both of my fan coils, even though they're not quite drawn this way, but higher than both my fan coils. Both of my D5s are mounted exactly at the same height. Same as also hot water heater, and also some of these mounted about the same height. The bottom lines are all below the expansion tank for the engine, which is pretty high up on the van. The benefit this provides is that it really allows me to make sure I don't have to have a secondary expansion tank inside the van, and of course potential from a leakage or fill or anything else. I have one place to fill my coolant system. It's all combined together. Now, from a safety point of view, these 2 isolation valves allow me to isolate that off. I've not had a single leak in the system in 5 years of operation. I've driven down to -5, or have camped into -5 degrees. I probably have driven in slightly less, although I can't remember, but at least that cold. And I certainly have driven and camped in lots of temperatures that are below freezing and have been perfectly fine, warm. All of my system has fittings and hose that is designed and rated to handle basically between -40 to, I think, 250 degrees is my minimum set point or minimum operating temperature that's designed to handle. It can handle, some of those components can even handle more. That's roughly the operating temperatures. That's in Fahrenheit, but -40s to be in the same in centigrade Fahrenheit. But that's the temperature rating that all my components can handle. So I know they can handle what the engine can throw at it, which basically tops out at about 230, 235 degrees Fahrenheit, and certainly what I'm going to camp out in, which is probably nothing below -20 that I'm going to be camping out in. The -5 was even probably an anomaly. Normally I wouldn't be camping out even below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, but I know it can handle that. It's handled it fine. There is, of course, antifreeze in that. That antifreeze is generally rated to about -20. So back to my system here. So hot water, from the tank here flows on a 3-way valve. If that is open, because I've switched it open, my single switch that all this is powered from, then it allows that heat to go to my auxiliary pump, which also is powered by that same switch. Goes into fan coil. The fans are powered by that same switch, and it just simply circulates through that, again through this check valve and right on back towards the engine. Now, the reason why it goes back towards the engine, if there is a pressure that needs to be equalized, right, or some sort of hot gases that build up in there, it can escape onto the expansion tank and so forth in the engine. So same way as the engine's dealing with it. Otherwise, if it's hot enough, it will circulate back through, of course, and reheat everything back up. Or, well, it'll circulate back through my D5, which is at the time, if it's running, it'll circulate through. And again, I have this drawn not quite perfectly, but it'll circulate back to D5. The D5 will reheat it and it'll recirculate back. And I can keep that circulation loop running through my heating system as long as I have that heating switch on. This circulation pump, and this will be open. And what I found is that for about 5 to as much as 15 minutes after I have the heater running, the D5, once I shut it off, for about another up to 15 more minutes, I still have heat that I can pull from that system, because this system, this heating system's heating up to between about 100 to about 140 degrees or so. So I've got a lot of heat in there, and a lot of heat's being stored in my hot water system here, this hot water tank. So I can keep pulling that heat from that for some period of time, even without the heater running, so I can shut the heater off and still keep getting some residual heat without the heater running. It's a real nice benefit. The other benefit the system provides is it also gives me a second auxiliary heater for the engine, so I can heat up the engine even faster, as well as the van. So by turning both these on at the same time, when I'm below 37 degrees and I start the engine, they both are now heating up. They both run perfectly fine off the single auxiliary fuel tap that comes off the fuel tank, and they just tee off of that for the fuel in both. They run perfectly fine on that. They don't take much fuel at all. They sip fuel. I think it's 0.06 gallons per hour for these heaters on their high mode. They have a high and a low mode, 0.03 gallons per hour in the low mode. So they don't take much fuel at all, so that little 1/4-inch tube, or a little less than that 3/16 tube, is more than enough to supply that fuel. So I can turn them both on at the same time. Now what I've done is I'm heating this coolant loop to get more heat to the engine to help it heat up quicker. When it's really cold, I found that's definitely an advantage. I find that it can heat up much quicker. I get heat then out of the dash, so I can get some warmth. And also I'm warming up the whole now camper, which is cold because I've been camping out in the cold, right? And the engine's cold, so it gives it a chance to heat everything up quicker. Now, a couple of key points here I want to point out. The D5, my D5 is operated by the programmable thermostat, and so I can program that, control my temperature sensor or temperature set points or time and period to run it and all that stuff, and that's on its own, so I can run the D5 on its own. This switch now, the single switch I can reach from bed, turns everything else on, including this switch, which I don't have drawn connection drawn to it. They're really just little tiny PWM controllers. I think they cost like $5 or $8 a piece. They're not expensive. These fans, which are pretty low, I would say about a half an amp to a full amp between the small and the large fan coil. So very small loads. And now I could turn up those fan speeds. And I found that to be a real advantage for a few reasons. One is that if I'm in bed, I don't need as much heat up front, so I could turn that fan speed controller down, and I can reach that from bed as well. It's right by this heating switch here as well. So I could turn that down, and I can just have all the fan and therefore way up in the back by the bed, and therefore most of the heat directed to the bed area, right? Vice versa, if I'm in the front, I'm making breakfast, I want to get that warmed up, I can direct that heat to the front and get that heat there. So that works out incredibly well for being able to control it. Or you can just turn them both all the way up, or you can turn them down. Like, so if you like to sleep with a little bit of heat going, you can have that D5 running. It's all the way in the front of the van. Both of these exhaust out about the same spot, just underneath the van. I can have it running I can turn those fan speeds way down, and so you could be sleeping and you can have those fan speeds way down, just have a nice little bit of very comfortable heat coming out. Not like that D2 where it's like a furnace. It just really makes a lot of thrusting, air coming out. These have nice, really, you can barely hear them, if you can hear them at all when they're on low. You have a nice gradual heat coming out. So it's really nice when you're on a phone call, or yes, if you want to sleep, or whatever else you want to do in there. So that's one advantage of it. A couple more things I want to point out, so that if you do take this on yourself, you make sure you're thinking about these things. One more thing is, I also have a pressure relief valve up here, and that's it's coolant rated. Everything in here is coolant rated. All of my chuck valves, everything's coolant rated. So most of it's stainless, but nonetheless, everything is specifically coolant rated valve. It's an air release valve, and it's there just so that when I fill this system up, which again is all filled from the same factory expansion tank, and that's it, and it accommodates all of it. And again, this isn't drawn to scale. This expansion tank is higher than this fan coil by a significant amount. Both these fan coils are mounted at the floor of the van. The expansion tank is mounted, about 2 to 3 feet above the floor, so pretty high up there. But just to make sure any air doesn't get, trapped in the system, that's the key thing there. The other couple things you want to think about too, one, air trapped in your tank here. You could get air trapped in this tank, so how to think about that, or also how to drain it. Also, another thing to think about is I see a lot of people, when they add a D5, a hydronic heater, or even an air heater, they run the exhaust out underneath the sill of the van. And that's a good idea from getting the exhaust out, but it definitely puts that noise and those emissions out towards your neighbors, wherever they are. If you're, wherever you're camping, right, and you're running it, whether it's in a ski parking lot, as an example. The factory one does not do that. It just dumps straight down out of the heater, which is basically right underneath the driver's seat, and it just dumps straight down. The bottom of the van is incredibly well sealed up, and running that as well as running this other one, which also dumps out right underneath the van there, I've never smelled it or noticed any fumes or anything inside. I have a CO2 sensor inside, and I've never picked up any of those fumes. So I don't think those exhausts need to go underneath the sill. I do see them sometimes get a little bashed up or caught up on weeds and stuff, or rocks if you do go down trails. And like I said, it puts a little more noise towards your neighbors. Underneath the van, you don't really hear it as like you do as much as it points out the side. So that's another thing to think about. One more thing to think about too is I actually have 6 temperature sensors as part of this system, and they're all just purely for monitoring. None of them do any control, but I have 2 of them are just interior and exterior temperatures, and they're backed by the bed too. So I can flip on a switch that powers those on, and that way I can turn them off at night so it stays dark. I turn that on, I can see what the outside temperature is, and I can see what the inside temperature is, and I can go, I think I'm going to run the heater. It's pretty cold out, or I need to put on some more clothing for going out today, right? It's pretty cold. It's a really nice to have thing, and those temperature sensors are pretty inexpensive. I run the temperature sensor for the outside one all the way down underneath the van. It's all the way back, kind of just in front of the rear wheel well. So on the driver's side, so opposite of where the exhaust is on the passenger side, so I don't have any exhaust influence. I don't really have any engine influence because it's so far back in the van, and so that works really well for really picking up an accurate outside temperature. The other thing is the other 4 temperature sensors, I have them on my supply and return of my heating system. So what's the temperature of the water coming into my heating system? It's actually, I believe, right here and right about here. And so I have them, those temperature sensors essentially taped and wrapped with insulative tape around those tubes. It's great. I can turn on that one BlueSea's OELD temperature sensor. It's got the 4 temperature sensors on there. I program which each one is, and it just tells me what those readouts are, and of course also graphs them over time too, so I can see. And so the nice benefit of that is I know exactly that my system's working. Now, I've never had it not work, which is fantastic, but it tells me also how quickly things are ramping up. Obviously, it's going to depend on ambient conditions, how cold it is outside or inside, and when's the last time you ran the system and all those things. But I've noticed I can keep hot water in this tank for about 24 hours after I've run the engine or my D5. And another key point is that every time my engine's running, once this coolant from the engine gets to 175 degrees, it allows that water to pass on through, and that automatically heats my hot water. So for the most part, every day I have hot water for free. I don't have to turn on my D5 to get hot water. It is free hot water, extra from the engine, right? And so it just automatically does that. And all I've done is really just add a little bit of additional radiator to the factory engine by letting the coolant just come back a little bit further and go through a heat exchanger in my hot water tank. It's a real benefit to always having that free hot water. The other benefit that provides is within several hours after running the engine, I can turn on the heater and still pull a reason of heat off of that by turning on my heating loop only and not the D5, and get a little bit of heat. So if I want to run that heater for just say 5 to 15 minutes, I can get the heat out of this for about that period of time without running the D5 at all. So I just want a little bit of warm up. I don't even have to turn on the D5, assuming I've run my engine recently. Say I drove into camp, I've been in there for a few hours, I've made dinner, I'm getting ready to go to bed. You know, it's a little chilly. Let me just go and turn on the heater. I don't even have to turn on the D5. I can suck the heat that's residual from the engine in that IsoTemp hot water heater, because it's stored in that tank of hot water, right? That's become a thermal battery. And so I can pull off of that. Now, by doing that, I'm not going to have really hot water in the morning. But by morning time, it's all going to be cooled off anyways. If I'm camping in a cold environment, I'm going to probably want to have heated air and also maybe heated water to wash dishes, wash your hands, wash your face, take a quick shower, whatever it may be. So I can do all of that. Speaking of showers, this system works great for running off when you got engine heat for washing your hands, washing dishes, washing your face, stuff like that, for like I said, about 24 hours. If you want to take a shower after several hours of running the engine, you're not going to have enough heat for a longer shower. You're going to need to run the D5 if you really want to take a shower over, let's say, a few minutes. So it's great for that kind of short, typical, common uses of washing your hands, washing your face, dishes, things like that. But if you do want to take a shower, then I turn on my D5. That keeps the hot water coming. And what I've noticed is that the D5 will kick up to its high mode, heats up that hot water, and it quickly just throttles down to the low mode, because even in the low mode, it's still putting out enough heat for shower water. Because shower water, when you think about it, it's heating this water up to about 140 degrees or so. But in a shower, you're really only kind of using 95 to 110 degrees, probably, something in that range. So by the time you mix it with some cold water and so forth, you're not using that much hot water. And so it can keep up on low really without much of an issue. On a longer shower, occasionally maybe it just kicks up on high just for a minute or two and then kicks back down to low. So it has no problem keeping up. And it regulates that on its own just by monitoring the temperature of this system as it travels through. So that is my heating system that I have in my van, Mountain Bluebird. I'm going to show a little more about some of the things that I've talked about. And I highly recommend this system because it's worked great for 5 years in really cold environments. But also, what I want you to do is keep watching my videos. Make sure you do subscribe, because I've got something really cool coming up soon. I am building a new camper. And in my new camper, I am doing an entirely new heating system. And I say entirely new heating system, meaning one that I do not believe has ever been used in a camper yet. And I've tested it out. and I'm really super excited. And so this system works great, but I believe my new system is even going to have some advantages over it, and I'm going to share more with you in upcoming videos about that, and of course also about my new camper build out, which I'm really excited to share more with you guys. So get out there, ski, hike, backcountry ski, cross-country ski, go skating, sledding, whatever. Get out there in the snow, enjoy the winter time that we have, stay nice and warm, go camp out for the night, go to some nice beautiful spot and watch the stars at night and see all that, and then come back and watch my videos to get other tips on other things you can do in your camper van or your next camper van, like I'm going to share with you soon. Thanks for watching. Please do also share with others. Bye now.